He used to take out opponents on an irregular basis. He now does it almost on a weekly basis. And that shows, I think, just how unstable things are behind the scenes in the Russian leadership.
First of all, then, let's talk about the sort of dominant story of the last couple of days, and this is around the Wagner group leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, and really a growing international consensus that he has been killed after Russia reported a fatal plane crash on Wednesday. This morning, the Ministry of Defence here in the UK says that there's not yet definitive proof that Prigozhin was on board, but it is highly likely that the mercenary leader is dead. Nicky, I suppose there's a broad question here in terms of, is Europe safer as a result of Prigozhin likely being dead, or is there greater instability today? What is your analysis?
Well, I think my analysis is probably greater and continuing instability. I think what we don't know, of course, is what's going to happen to the Wagner group, who were operational not just in Ukraine, but also in Africa, for example. Ultimately, and I suppose what's happened, one has to assume this should be laid at the door of President Putin and his ministers, and therefore it does smell of some kind of desperation. It's no surprise that if you launch a coup and it fizzles out, then I'm afraid it was only a matter of time before the Putin administration got Prigozhin. But I think it does mean more instability overall. And fascinating, obviously, what's happened, undoubtedly right to have lots of coverage. What we mustn't lose sight of is obviously what is still happening in Ukraine and the importance of the Ukrainians winning that conflict. I'm struck by, Roger Boy's has written a couple of articles in the Times today, but his comment piece, the last line where he talks about Putin, after decades in power, he has made Russia poorer, he has shamed it, his conscience is clean, only because he never uses it. And they are brilliant words, and we still have Putin there, and that's the source of the instability.
Let's bring Jack in on Vladimir Putin, Jack, because I know that you've actually met the man, so you can perhaps give us a bit of insight into what he is like.
Yeah, I met him several times when I was First Minister, and I was always struck by how long-term he was in his thinking. I met him first round about 20 years ago, just around about the time that the Iraqi regime had fallen in Baghdad, and the American-led forces had taken the city. And he had a big, broad smile on his face. He said, when America's unpopular in the world, this is good for Russia. And he was thinking long-term, even back then. And of course, he's still in place. But I think what we've seen over the last 2 years is an increasingly desperate older man starting to make mistakes in his judgments. And obviously in Ukraine, he's made a massive mistake, underestimating the willingness of the Ukrainians to fight for the country and to try and recover their freedom. So I think this is just another step along that road. He used to take out opponents on an irregular basis. He now does it almost on a weekly basis, and that shows, I think, just how unstable things are behind the scenes in the Russian leadership. Where it leads us is a very good question. The world is probably a better place if the Wagner Group leadership are taken out, as some of them have been this week. And as Nicky says, that affects Central African Republic, Mali, and a number of other places, not just Ukraine. But I think the instability in the Russian regime could be a good thing if it helps bring down what we've seen over recent years. But if it leads to an escalation in violence and conflict, then that will obviously go beyond the borders of Ukraine and become a very worrying thing for the whole of Europe.
Just in terms of sort of meeting him face to face, was it ever, I don't know what the right word is, but unnerving or jarring or uncomfortable to even sort of converse with him? Because he's always been quite a vile man, if we're honest, in terms of how he runs Russia, the tactics that he himself has employed, etc. over the years. Was that ever sort of slightly, uncomfortable?
Well, I was very struck by how sure he was about what he was doing. At that time, I was meeting leaders from all corners of the world, and every human being's got a little bit of insecurity, and they tend to show it. And you know, but everybody's got a funny side as well as a serious side. He was very serious and very cautious in what he said, and when he spoke, you knew that he meant what he was saying. And from that point of view, at that time, I've regularly asked at that time who was the most impressive person I had met. I never ever admired the man, but in terms of his control of his position and his direction of travel, he always seemed to me to be much more in control of that than most other people that I met at that time or since. But I think that's changed in the last few years. I think he's got older. I don't know what his health is like, but certainly as he's got older, I think we see more of a sort of panic response to these situations, and more regular taking out of opponents, and that is a signal of somebody who's become insecure. And while that is potentially a good thing, it's also potentially a very worrying thing.